Meeting. Our format is for our leader to share their experience, strength, and hope on 3 steps at a time for 4 weeks. There will be a new lead at the end of the series. If there is time at the end of the lead, we will open the meeting up for sharing. This is our lead for the series, Cameron. He did a phenomenal job with 1 through 6. He's here to do 7, 8, 9 tonight. So here he is.
Hi family, I'm Cameron. I'm an alcoholic. Again, just the same disclaimers I give every week. First and foremost, if I say something that's different than that of your sponsor is 100% right. I believe God blesses sponsorship. And second, anytime I'm given an opportunity to give back to Alcoholics Anonymous, I always say thank you. So thank you guys for having me back out, and thanks again for allowing me to come out again next week. I'm absolutely indebted to Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, I can promise all of you that, left to my own devices, I wouldn't be sitting up here, or probably anywhere for that matter. I wish I had time to run through 1 through 6 again, just on that off chance that there's one newcomer sitting in here. We talk constantly about that being the most important person in the room, and, I highly encourage you, if you don't actively have a sponsor that can sit down and take you through this literature, that you find one rapidly. Nowhere in my book does it say don't get into a relationship for a year. I don't think it's terrible advice, but at the same time, when I get into the rooms and I'm new, I better get into a relationship with someone, probably God. And since we're usually incapable of doing that, I should probably get into a relationship with somebody that has a relationship with God. We call them sponsors. And we've talked, for the last 2 weeks, essentially about a bunch of different stuff, we spent a lot of time the first week on the problem, and the idea that if I could just make a decision to stop drinking or to stop using, I wouldn't be sitting up here. I wouldn't need Alcoholics Anonymous, I wouldn't need to sponsor people, I wouldn't need the 12 steps, because I would just be not picking up no matter what. It was very, very important for me to understand that I don't have the power of choice in that regard. And when I look up at the wall and I see powerless, it's talking about the idea that obviously I'm not connected to any sort of power that can free me from the obsession. But I also don't have the power to just make a decision to stop and do so. Again, if I did, I wouldn't be here. So let's get right into 7, 8, and 9. Last week, obviously, we talked about 6. It's a little difficult to talk about 6 without talking about 7. Just like it would be hard to talk about 8 without talking about 9. And we're at the point where we've done a 5th step. I've sat down and I've identified all these different things that have run my life for, pretty much my entire life until doing that 4th and 5th step. And I said last week, and I'm a firm believer that, as I look back over my life and I reflect on some of those things, I haven't had the same, 20 bad relationships. I've had 1 bad relationship with 20 different girls. I haven't been resentful at 100 different people. I've had 1 or 2 main resentments, which usually stem back to my childhood, at 100 different people. And if I don't start to identify those and look at some of those character defects that continue to crop up and, offer those up to God and continually work on those, they're going to continue to manifest themselves over and over and over again. Without 3, 4, 5, there's no 6 and 7, obviously. The steps are in order for a reason. And now that we've identified those and we've seen the selfishness, we've seen the dishonesty, we've seen the fear that typically creates those things and manifests them in our lives over and over again, we can start to actually work on those things. And unfortunately, in my experience and what I've seen, 6 and 7 are skipped over all the time. And that's from my experience as well. I remember after I spent my hour with God after my 5th step, and I was instructed, as outlined in the book, you spend this hour, and at the end of the hour, you've just reflected on what we talked about. So if you're willing, to give these things up to God, as it asks in the 6th step, you move on to 7. And I had done 6 and 7 in my hour of power. I had a short conversation about what that meant with my sponsor afterwards. But the fact is, as I saw that, I knew I could check it off my list, and I moved forward. And it wasn't until I accumulated some pain and I saw some of the brokenness from the ways that I've lived my life that I actually stopped to take a look at 6 and 7. And I stopped to look at some of the things that were still driving me, even without being aware of it. And like it says in the book, elimination of alcohol, that, quitting smoking crack is just the beginning. That's just the start. A much more important demonstration of the principles, of the steps, is in my everyday affairs as I go throughout my life. And so when we get to 7, the way I've heard a lot of people refer to them as couch steps. And what I mean by that is, I could essentially sit there and do all the steps up till 9 without leaving the house. I'd have to have a guy come in to do my 5th step. He hears my entire life story. He's like, good luck with that, pal. He leaves. I'm left with 6, 7. And then I make my 8 step list. And the first time that I actually, do the action and leave the house and go out is in the 9th step. And, it's very, very short in the book. I'll read the 2 paragraphs that it has just on 6 and 7. 8's even shorter. if we can answer to our satisfaction, again, we just spent this hour with God. We pulled down our book, we went to page 59, we've identified the first 5 steps and looked at them and asked ourselves, have I been thorough? Have I been thorough in the work thus far? Because I don't want to continue to move forward if I haven't. Have I honestly looked at this inventory and been thorough and honest and shared that with another person and got rid of some of these deepest, darkest secrets that I've held on to? And have I honestly taken a look at some of the forces or patterns that have driven my life for this long? If so, if we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Which is worded pretty interestingly there. I hear a lot of people say that, oh, well, I've got to be willing. I have to be willing. I have to be willing to make amends. I have to be willing to give up these character defects. And that's actually not what the book says. The book says that I have to ask God to be willing. And there's been times where I've had to ask God to help me be willing, to be willing, to be willing, to be willing, just because I'm an asshole, or because I dislike that person that strongly, or because I'll hold on to that resentment until it drags me, through the dirt, or because whatever reason. And as I spend time in prayer with God and I asking Him, please help me be willing to give these up, one of 2 things will happen. One is I will get so tired of saying that prayer over and over and not putting in any action that I'll stop saying it. Or 2 is that I'll become a little more lighthearted and a little more aware and capable and able to move forward in that and start to look at that and realize how these things are not of service to me. And a lot of the times the only way that I'll realize that is by looking at the harm that it's causing other people. And I start to look at the instincts that we talked about in the 5th step, and I start to see some of that stuff. And as I went through the 4th and 5th step, I remember when I was pretty newly sober, I went to hear a guy speak who's now my current sponsor, and he shared something that I found very interesting, and it doesn't say this anywhere in the literature, and it's, as I look back over my experience and through the identification of 3 through 7, I started to realize that a lot of it was true, and I still see some of it crop up now, and what he said was, he was talking about how he had a lot of time in another fellowship, and the time didn't stick, for the reason that he said he never went to give back to the fellowship. And in his words, he was stealing from the fellowship. He never looked for somebody to help. And what he said is that the punishment of the thief is that his goods are never safe. And the punishment of the liar is that he can never believe anybody. And the punishment of the adulterer is that he can never trust his partner. And the punishment of the selfish and the self-centered is that he can never give or receive unconditional love. And as I looked over that and I started to identify that and look at some of my relationships in the 4th and 5th step and bring those up in 6 and 7, I started to realize that a lot of my distrust or dishonesty or those things stemmed from those exact things. It wasn't anything that was going on in my current relationship. It was stuff that I had seen so often prior, or my own dishonesty, or my own disloyalty, or the own ways that I've lived my life time and time again. And it's so often that as I'm going through 4 and 5 and I look at the 4th column of my mistake, it's very similar to the 2nd column of somebody else or one of my other resentments. And even now, when I'm in a relationship right now with a girl that I really care about. She's a sweetheart. I love her to death. And as I look, I see stuff crop up. And it has nothing to do with her, and it has nothing to do with even this relationship, I think. It has to do with every relationship I've been in prior. And those are the moments where I get to work on 6 and 7. And those are the moments where I get to start to become aware. And sometimes the most action I can take in those exact moments for step 7 is no action at all. And it was told, I've heard, is anyone in here familiar with the statue of David? They had, I think they originally commissioned Da Vinci to carve this statue out of this stone. They had this stone that they figured was rotten or couldn't be used, and Da Vinci looked at it and he said that this isn't going to work. I'm not going to be able to do this. So who they got was Michelangelo to carve, which now is known as one of the most popular statues in the world, which was the statue of David. And what he did is he carved it and it was beautiful. And afterwards, people asked him how did you make this stone David? How did you do it? And what he said was, I didn't make this stone David. What I did was I removed the parts of it which were not David. And as I've gone through 6 and 7, I've realized that step 7 is the process of allowing God to remove the parts of me which are not me and which are not of service to me. And a lot of times that comes with great pain. As I said, when I was originally taken through the steps, I didn't do really any 6 and 7 work. I hit my knees and I said the prayer and I asked God to remove these things that I just identified. But after that, I walked away and my perception had changed and I had seen things different, and that part was beautiful. I was able to look at my own mistakes and occasionally put in effort, but I didn't really understand 6 and 7. I didn't really put a conscious effort to move forward with that. And me personally, like I'm not a huge fan of like pick a character defect and work on that for the day. Like it's never been very successful for me. But the idea of like we've gained that pause by the 10th step, I can now look and see like what the action is that I need to take. How do I start to overcome some of these things? How do I start to develop healthy relationships? How do I start to not become resentful in situations where I would be resentful? And the Taoists have like it's like a practice, I think it's called Wu Wei, I believe. And it's like the art of action with no action. And sometimes in the moment, the best thing that I can do is take no action. Where other times I would have swung on somebody or I would have got into an argument with somebody, and now I'm starting to realize like that's not the best approach. That's not the best approach. Bill Wilson's very smart. The 12 and 12 was written 13 years after the original book. There's only two paragraphs for 6 and 7 in our book, and then like half a sentence for 8. And I think he did that intentionally. He came back and read a lot more about the steps and the technicalities of it and those kind of things. But I think that if I was newly sober and I would have looked at that and I would have read what was required of me, I'd have been like, nah, I'm good. Like, that's probably way too much. And I wouldn't have actually looked at that. And I'm not here to be argumentative or any of that. I can only share on my experience. And I can, my sponsor is a guy that says, he'll never talk bad about anyone, but what he will say is this is what Alcoholics Anonymous thinks of this. And I've heard it thrown around like a lot, like the principle behind the steps. And I've fallen victim to this, and I've even shared it from the podium before, and my sponsor immediately, shredded me for it because there's no literature to back that up. And Bill Wilson is very, very, very smart, and he's a wordsmith, and he's not going to use the same word twice. So when you look up at the wall, and if you would have asked Bill Wilson, he talked about it in a grapevine, the difference between defects of characters and shortcomings, he'd have told you it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And in the 12th step, when it says having a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, he's not going to say steps immediately after. So what he says is we try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. The principles are the steps. And then what it says in the 12 and 12 for step 7 is this. Indeed, the attainment of greater humility is the foundation principle of each of AA's 12 steps. For without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. Nearly all AAs have found, too, that unless they develop much more of this precious quality than may be required just for sobriety, they still haven't much chance of becoming truly happy. Without it, they cannot live to much useful purpose, or, in adversity, be able to summon the faith that can meet any emergency. And humility, the foundation of apparently behind all the steps. And again, the principles are the steps. But if I don't gain this sort of humility and I don't start to it's my sponsor always said, as soon as you talk about humility from the podium, you're no longer humble. So it's a difficult thing to talk about, and it's even more of a difficult thing to articulate. It's hard to describe, it's hard to express. I haven't found a definition of it that's like exactly right. And again, thank God for Bill Wilson, because he came back in 1961 in the Grapevine and published an article called Humility for Today, where he gives his definition, and I'm just going to read that real quick. It says, I'm sure, for instance, that I ought to seek out the finest definition of humility that is possible for me to envision. This definition doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. I'm only asked to try. Suppose I choose one like this. Perfect humility would be a state of complete freedom from myself, freedom from all the claims that my defects of character now lay so heavily upon me. Perfect humility would be a full willingness in all times and place to find and do the will of God. And that's what Bill Wilson said in 1961. And like I still thought about it, and a lot of the guys or the mentors in my life, I've looked around and they're very humble. They're not disturbed by particular situations. And like, how do you see that? Like, it was told to me early on, this analogy, and this is probably the only time I'll ever use this or ever say this, so don't ask me about it later. But it was said, humility, in the sense, is a lot like pornography. And I heard this, and I was like, you're absolutely crazy. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And he told me there was a case against Harry Flint, who's the owner of Hustler, the CEO of Hustler, whatever it is, and he went to the Supreme Court, and they were essentially trying to get him shut down, and I have no opinion either way on any of that. But it was interesting, because what happened is, during jury selection, the first thing that they did was they said, all right, well, anyone from the church, you guys got to go, and they made them leave, because it couldn't be unbiased. And then what they did is they asked the remaining people, have any of you ever been to a museum? And most of them were like, well, yeah, of course. And then they asked, well, have any of you paid to enter that museum? And they were like, well, yeah. So then the question that they asked says, okay, well, have you seen any of like the you know, they call it the majors, like Da Vinci or Michelangelo or any of those guys, and they were all like, yeah. You know, and what they said is like, okay, well, how is the art that you're paying to see there any different than the art that my client is showing? And no one could come up with a logical, satisfactory answer. But one guy said, I can't explain the difference, or I can't articulate the difference, but I know it when I see it. And it's the same thing with humility with me. You know, I can't articulate it, and I can't tell you exactly, guys, what it looks like or what it is, but I know that I've been sponsored by men that no matter what their circumstances around them were, it hasn't bothered them. You know, guys that are just so incredibly humble. You know, I can say that about them. They probably can't say it about themselves, but like the little situations and all of that stuff pretty much directly correlates with 6 and 7 work. People that have worked on themselves time and time again. And again, as I said at the beginning of this, most of that comes from pain. Most of my willingness or ability or motivation to move forward comes from being in great spots of pain. And you know, another book talks about a shepherd and this lost sheep, and how he goes out to find this lost sheep over and over and over again. And if I know anything, it's at Alcoholics Anonymous, is that you know, we're a collection of lost sheep, of broken sheep. You know, we're that porcupine that the more you hug it, the harder it's going to hurt you. And the people that loved us the most got hurt over and over and over again. And what happens is the sheep runs away. And the shepherd, he leaves the rest of the flock, and he goes out and he finds it and he brings it back. And what he does, what any good alcoholic does, he runs away again. Does it again. He's like, this is cool, this is fun. He goes out, he brings them back again. Sheep runs away a third time. What he does is he breaks his 2 front legs, the shepherd. Not because he hates him, not because he doesn't care about him, just because he wants to protect him from himself. And then what he does, in the month that he's healing, he straps him to the shepherd's chest and lets him heal there. He resets his bones and lets him heal for however long it takes a sheep to heal. But what happens is, as he's there healing, he can hear the heartbeat of the shepherd. He can hear it over and over again, and he starts to get in sync with the shepherd, and he starts to get in tune with the shepherd. Then what happens is, when he's let back down with the rest of the pack, he already knows, kind of, in a sense, the heartbeat of the shepherd, what their next move's going to be, what the next thought's going to be, what the next action's going to be, and he starts to become a leader of that pack. So often the people that have caused immense harms to our families and our homes and those kind of things get to come back and be that beacon of light for the people that are still suffering. If anybody has siblings that are suffering from the same disease that we suffer from, a lot of times the only thing that we can do is stick and stay. Stick and stay and be that example of sobriety, be that example of truth that we can show in one other's lives. And that's been my experience with 6 and 7. I get broken, you know, and by my same continuous actions that I've run over and over again, I get reset. I get to spend time with the shepherd, or whoever that is for you, whatever your conception of, or whatever you want to call God. It doesn't matter, as we talked about in the second step. And I get to get back on track. And oftentimes we come back more resilient, or more motivated, or more, you know, whatever the word I'm looking for is, and we move forward. And step 6 and 7, again, lifelong processes. We need to start to develop that humility. And it's a hard thing to, you know, we can't really just acquire it. It comes as a result of sometimes taking the action, sometimes not taking the action. You know, it's very simple when we look at the sexual conduct on a 5th step, how often it says, like, what could I do better? Like, the answer is, well, you typically, like, well, not that. Not whatever I did. That's what I should have done. And it's really simple. So a lot of times it comes, like, when I'm about to take that action, or I'm about to do something to cause harm to somebody in that moment, am I able to stop? Am I able to stop? Because the book tells me my instincts are God-given and therefore good. So if that's the case, I need to figure out how to exercise those in a way that doesn't cause harm to other people. That's sexual instinct, social instinct, and security instinct. Now, when we do cause harm, because guess what? We're human. We're going to fail. We're going to fall short. A lot of people say they're like progress, not perfection, and it's another one of those things that is used oftentimes as a cop-out. And what it talks about in the book is, the idea is not that I'm ever going to be perfect. You know, I've accepted the fact that that's not the case. I'm human. I'm going to fall short again. One of the first things I tell my sponsees is what was told to me by my sponsor. I'm human. I will fail you. Time and time again. You need to start to become reliant on something or somebody that will not fail you. We choose to call him God. And what happens is, I know that. I know I'm not going to be perfect. But what I do is I change what I'm striving to or for to perfection. Now I'm striving to perfection, and guess what? I'm going to fail, I'm going to fall short, and I'm not going to beat myself up for that. I'm also not going to use that as a cop-out for why I fall short, or why, you know, I don't strive or don't do those things. And when I change it to perfection and I know exactly what I'm striving for and I know what that looks like in the dishonesty and the selfish and the self-seeking and inconsiderate ways of my life, and I'm moving forward, I'll start to see progress. And invariably, I'll start to gain that, what we refer to as humility. And I'll start to gain some of the other things that come as a result of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is that peace, where I can be at peace with myself, and that happiness and that joy and that freedom, which I think most of us come in here looking for. It's not good enough to just get away from a crack pipe. It's not good enough to just put down the bottle for the day. If I can't, if you guys can't treat what happens to me when I put that stuff down, we've got no business. Because what happens is when I put stuff down, I get worse. So there's got to be something to help me find that sort of peace that I spent my entire life out there looking for. In whatever it is, a bottle, a bag, a needle, a pipe, a relationship, money, it doesn't matter. I've looked everywhere. And I haven't found it until I came in here to you guys as a result of going through that step process. And so then what we do is we make the 8-step list. And I remember one of the most powerful things was when my sponsor burned my 4th step. But my first thought initially was this asshole. I'm going to have to write an entire 8-step list. And then after that, we had like the heartfelt brother-to-brother moment. But I knew what it meant. I had already written all these people that I've harmed and wronged and that I needed to make amends to. And but I sat down and I made another list. And I've done this several ways as I've gone through being sober. And, like I said, one line. Let's look at step 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So, as I said, it doesn't matter if they burn them or not. It doesn't say anywhere in the book to do it. It was just a very spiritually rewarding thing for me. And so we make the 8-step list. And I've had a list made where it's just names and then just like a bullet point of the harm that I caused them. Again, same thing. When you sit down to make this list, ask God to show you the people that need to be on there. I'm 2.5 years sober, and there's still people that I didn't remember at that initial thing that crop up, and sometimes I'll write them down. And then I've done it a way where you separate them into columns. The right nows, the not yets, the maybe some days, and the nevers. And like people, again, think it's a trick and that no one can be in the never column, but the fact is some people are going to be in there. The book doesn't say I have to be willing. It says I have to ask God to help me be willing. If I'm not doing that, then there's an issue. But if I'm asking for that help to become willing to make amends to these people that I so adamantly do not want to make amends to, what'll hopefully happen is I'll make some in the first column and then maybe some people will bump over. Or maybe God will put somebody directly in front of me and I'll know in my heart and I'll be blessed with that forgiving spirit and I'll know in my heart that this is the time where I need to make things right with this person because I may not ever get another chance to do so. And usually in those moments, again back to 6 and 7, it's either I'm going to take that action and I'm going to take that opportunity that God's given to me to work on that or I'm not. And I'm going to pay the consequences of that typically. So again, however your sponsor tells you to make that list is 100% correct. And then it brings us to step 9. The first action step, as we talked about at the beginning of this. And the sobriety date of Alcoholics Anonymous is June 10th, 1935, which is the day that Dr. Bob went out and made all of his amends and achieved permanent sobriety. And I think that starts to show you the importance of going out and setting things right with the people that we've harmed over, however long we were running, or really just our whole lives, and we'll, continue to harm and fall short. And I remember asking a guy when I was pretty newly sober, like, what do you think about relationships in the first year? As I said earlier, it doesn't say anywhere in the book, don't get into a relationship for a year. I don't think it's terrible advice, for the reason it's really hard to work and grow in a relationship unless you're in one. So a lot of times I need to focus on other things. But what this person said to me was, I can tell you one thing, and that's that no relationship is healthier than the two people that are involved. And out of your relationship with you and God, my guess is that God's not the sick one. So why don't you start to work on that first? Why don't you start to grow that area first? And that's exactly what it does. Steps 1, 2, and 3 are all about God. Steps 4, 5, and 6 and 6 and 7 are essentially about me, or correcting those things. And then 8 and 9 are about other people. Others. There's really only 3 relationships in life. There's a relationship with God, there's a relationship with self, and then there's the relationship with others. The first one that we need to repair is that relationship with God. Then we need to repair our relationship with ourselves, and then we go out and we repair the relationship with others. And in my experience, you've all heard it, the 9th step promises, read it probably every single meeting, ever. You've heard them all the time. And a lot of that stuff is like the reason people come into AA. I think that most people come in obviously for the 10-step promise, that the obsession's removed and I can now easily control my desire for alcohol. I no longer have to wake up and despite not wanting to, despite having these consequences that are going to happen, find myself high again and again. I no longer have to do that. And it's promised by the 10th step. But the 9th step is that treatment to what comes after. That you're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. You'll not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. You know, all these different things. And it's rewarding, man. And like by this point, when you get to the 9th step, I remember I was a couple months sober. I had a sponsor that took me through the book pretty rapidly. He sat me down. He took me sentence by sentence, line by line through the book, and he broke it down in a way that the book came to life. It came to life, and it motivated me to go through the rest of the steps. And when I got to step 9, I was excited, because I knew I had caused so much harm. I had seen it in the 4th and 5th column. I had looked at some of it in 6 and 7, and I could look around, obviously, at the circumstantial damage of my life. And typically, when I come down to South Florida, like, I've harmed so many people that, like, I'm sitting in treatment, and I'm ready to make 9-step amends, like, from my therapist office on the phone. And I've tried that, and it goes terribly, because I haven't done the 8 steps prior to that. You know, I call and I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry for that time that I cheated on you. Like, if you'd like to get back together, this would be a good time to tell me. And it just never goes well. And not to mention, it's not an amends. I had no idea what I was doing. But I was excited because, like, as I said, man, like, sometimes I joke over the last couple of weeks and, like, I say stuff. But the fact of the matter is like, there's nothing redeemable about my drinking. And, like, I absolutely love my mother to death. I'm sure you guys have heard me say that before. And, like, she's one of the most beautiful women in my life, and I would never, ever want to hurt her. Like, my soul is ingrained to, like, just try to, you know, please her and be there for her and protect her and do all these things for her. And heroin or crack or alcohol took me to a place where all I continually did was hurt her. And, you know, before I picked up drugs and alcohol, like, our home was happy, joyous, and free. You know, I brought those things into our house, and I infected the people around me until they were sicker than I was when I came in here to you guys. You know, so that, as I said before, there's nothing redeemable about my drinking. From the day I picked it up to the day I put it down, my life went straight in the toilet, as did the people around me. And, you know, with that being said, Bill Wilson says that the reason that Alcoholics Anonymous works is 2 reasons. One is a lot of people recover. I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. The book says it 31 times. It says recovering once, and it's in the family after, talking about a newcomer. And at the time, a newcomer was somebody that was still on a hospital bed. I've been freed from the obsession to drink and use. I no longer have that hopeless state that I had 2.5 years ago when I walked in here to you guys. That has nothing to do with me. It has to do with God, and it has to do as a result of me walking through the step process and connecting to that power that can give me those things. But the second reason is Bill Wilson says that it reunites homes. You know, those relationships that have been broken, those things that I've lost, or all that stuff, like, through Alcoholics Anonymous, we see those reunited. Like, my little sister, who's 9 years old, is indebted to Alcoholics Anonymous, and she doesn't even know it, for the reason that she has a brother today. You know, something that she didn't have for years. The night that she was born, I was out on a run, and, like, my parents had to Baker Act me because of some crazy situation. That's the kind of stuff I put my family through, and my little sister and my mom and all that stuff. And, you know, I remember I was armed with the facts, and, you know, the amends can be split up pretty much into four different, you know, sections or ways about, you know, going about it. And the first one's direct amends. You know, that situation where I go back and I sit down with somebody face to face and we have a conversation, and I tell them, like, you know, a lot of people say, like, don't say sorry, but, like, what the book says is sometimes it's warranted. You know, I'd like to apologize for this, and this, and I name the ways that I've harmed them. You know, I took money and stuff from my family, but more importantly, I stole peace of mind. I stole attention from their daughter. I stole anything that I could that had, like, you can't even put a price tag on it. So when I went back, like, I went back to set those things right. Not to necessarily get back the relationship, not to necessarily gain their trust back. Like, I went back to clear up my side of the street, and I did exactly as my sponsor and the book suggested me, and I sat down and I asked God to give me a forgiving spirit, because what it says in the 4th and 5th column is I set aside the wrongs others have done to me. Even if the wrong, I feel like, in my opinion, is way bigger than what I did to them, I asked God to help me set that aside, and I look at my mistake here. You know, what's my mistake in this situation, and I go back and I try to set that right. And, you know, immediately after I went through the 9th step, And my sponsor took me through 9, 10, 11 at the same time, for the reason that right after the promises, what it says is this thought brings us to step 10. What thought? The thought of making amends, meaning I haven't even made any amends. I do 10, 11, and 12 as I focus on step 9. And the good news is I was already doing 10 because the first thing my sponsor instructed me to do was go home at night, read page 84, 84 and do or 86 maybe, and do the inventory. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. So I was already doing an 11-step when I got there. It's hard to do an 11-step without also doing a 10-step because as I do that at night, I start to look throughout the day and see resentful, selfish, dishonest, afraid crop up over and over again. So I was already in there, and I was already actively taking members of Alcoholics Anonymous or newcomers through the book because that's what I was instructed to do, because that's what the first 100 did. And thank God for good sponsorship and somebody that understand that. And I didn't have a guy that said, hey, wait a year to sponsor, because I'd have been screwed. Because I'd have finished the other steps in 3 months, and then I'd have sat there, sucking on my thumb for 9 months until I was allowed to sponsor. And that wouldn't have worked for me, especially because what the book says is that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with another alcoholic. If nothing's going to so much ensure that I get drunk as me going down to the bar and drinking, that's exactly what I was going to do. So if nothing will so much ensure that I never go back to how I feel when I came in here to you guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down with another alcoholic with the literature in between us, and we're going to go line by line, sentence by sentence through that book. And that's exactly what we did. And I remember I got to, he took me through that, and like the next day I left on a plane to go home and see my family. And I got to have that conversation, and like those are the easy ones typically. I mean, I guess depending on the relationship, but most times you're gonna say like, hey, like I'm really sorry for this, this, and this. And our sponsorship family always either says or asks, is there any way I've harmed you that I don't even know about? Because a lot of times I've caused harm to people that I'm not aware of. I'm aware of the surface level of what I did, or the very basic, like, oh, I gossiped, or I robbed them, or I lied to them, or I cheated on them, that kind of stuff. But I don't really know what kind of harm I've caused them. I don't know if they lost sleep over that for months. I don't know if they were unable to get into another relationship because I harmed them so badly. I don't know that stuff. And we give them an opportunity or a chance to vent that and to say, yeah, this is what you did. And the book says that I don't argue or retaliate. It's not a debate. I'm not there to argue with them or say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, this is what happened. Like, I'm there to clean up my side of the street. And they're more than welcome to say whatever they want to me. And then the next question and the actual amends part of it is, what can I do, if anything, to set this right? And then what my sponsor told me in part of my language is, you shut the fuck up. You ask that question and you shut up, and whatever they say in that little block there is exactly what the amends is. So if I go back to my mother and I say, hey, like, I make the amends, and she says, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, it's so nice to have my son back and that kind of stuff. Like, then guess what? My amends process is that I keep doing what I'm doing. And the rest will fall into one of the other categories, which is a living amends, where I don't continue to do that stuff to other people. I don't continue to cause those harms to other people in their lives and those kind of things. And I remember I made amends to 3 or 4 people in my family, and, like, it went great. It was all the same, like, keep doing what you're doing. We're proud of you, all that good stuff. And, like, it definitely was going good because I owed them all financial, amends, and they were all like, yeah, no, you're good, just keep doing it. So I was like pumped. I was like, amends are sick, this is great. Now I've done some reflection and paid back a lot of that stuff that I've owed. But then I went to make amends to the person that's usually at top of our amends list, which is our exes, our ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. And I had a girl that I dated for 2 or 3 years, and she was a very, very sweet girl, not one of us. The only girl that's ever been faithful or loyal or honest or any of that stuff to me. And I, as an addict alcoholic who's been in unhealthy relationships my entire life, didn't know how to handle that and caused a lot of harm to her. A lot of harm to her. And it had been about a year or 2 years since we talked, probably longer than that. And I remember I reached out to her when I was in town for Christmas, and I told her, like, what I was trying to do. And I was like, I'd like to meet up with you sometime this week and have a conversation if you're open to hear it. And she was like, well, why? And like I told her, like, I'm going through this process and I'm an alcoholic, and the book tells me that if I don't move forward and I don't try to do these things, like, I might die. And the only way that I'm going to overcome my addiction or overcome my alcoholism is to sit down and try to make some of these things right that I've done to a lot of people. And I remember she told me, in not so many words, that, like, she wasn't interested. She said, I appreciate you reaching out, Cam, but, like, you've caused me more harm than anybody in my entire life. And, like, I've shut that door. I'm not willing to open it. And I remember I immediately after called my sponsor, and I was like, what do I do? He's like, what do you mean, what do you do? Like, you don't do anything. What the book says is that you've made your demonstration, and for the time being, that's enough. And if God wants to open that door for you to go make that amends, he will do that. He will do that. And I remember about 8 months later, a year later, I have a little sister, as I talked about earlier. She's a dancer and a cheerleader. And I got a call from my mom, and she said, hey, I signed your sister up for dance lessons this summer. You'll never guess who her choreographer is. And it happens to be the girl that I owed this amends to. And I got to go back over the summer, and I got to take my little sister to her dance choreography, and I got to make amends face-to-face with that girl that I thought I would never have the opportunity to do so. And again, it goes to show that, like, I don't necessarily, all we're responsible for here is throwing the stones. You know, God is responsible for the ripple effect and whatever that looks like. And in that equation, like, who fails? It's not God. You know, sometimes I don't cast that stone, or I don't make the effort to do that, or I don't make my demonstration, but the person that doesn't fail is God. And, like, I never know what the ripple effect of that will be. And that goes into pretty much everything. Pretty much everything. I remember I became a kid that, like, and this is kind of 6 and 7 stuff, I became a kid that, like, needed to know everything about this book. And, like, at first it was, like, a passionate, like, excited about Alcoholics Anonymous, excited about the history and all that stuff, but then it became a way for me to separate myself from you, because you couldn't really judge the book, or you couldn't really dispute the book, so it came a block between me and you guys. And I later became to look at that as a character defect and not the great blessing that I thought that it was. But as I reflected on it, like, the guys that I sponsored when I was so heavily involved with the work and sponsoring 20, 30 people at the time, and some of them have a year, 2 years sober and are, sponsored 30, 40 people, like, do you think they care? You know, that God was able to use my character defects as a way to reach other people. And everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous has a job, and that job might be either to, show what to do or show what not to do. And I think at that time I was probably a beacon or an example of what not to do. But God still used it for something positive. He still used it. He was still able to take that ripple effect and use it in a way that could reach other people and be helpful to people. And back to 9, we talked about the direct amends. There's going to be situations like, as I said, I've had situations where, like, people have appeared in front of me. And, like, I didn't even realize until that moment that I have owed them an amends. And then there's, of course, like, after you kind of go through this process and you're sober and, like, you harm somebody that's also sober, and you have to go, like, make the extremely awkward amends because you both know what you're doing, and it's, like, just as bad receiving one as it is giving one, and it's just, like, painful. Welcome to being sober. Especially if you're in a relationship, they're the worst. What can I do to set this right? It's just terrible. But it's freeing. It's freeing, and I think the 9-step offers us a lot of freedom. And those people appear in front of you, and you realize, like, okay, I owe this person amends, and you're able to go and you're able to make that amends right there on the spot with no planning, no thought behind it, and those are the ones typically where I've definitely seen God show up in ways that I've never expected. And then we have the amends in kind, which is, let's say, like, I was 15 and I stole a bunch of stuff from CVS, shoplifted like $50 worth of stuff, like, from a CVS in Pennsylvania. Like, I'm probably not going to pay hundreds of dollars to hop on a flight and go back to CVS and be like, hey, I stole all this stuff from you, here's the money. What I will probably do is, let's say, like, I do a lot of shopping, like, maybe next time I'll go to CVS instead of going to another store, and I'll start to pay that forward. And there's many, many ways to pay that forward, and, like, we're given opportunities constantly, and again, thank God for sponsorship. Sponsorship is going to be huge, especially when it comes to the amends, because they're going to guide you and they're going to walk you through probably each and every one of these. But I've heard a lot of creative things. And, like, how often, is it so simple to pull up off, 95 and there's a guy on the corner and just, giving him $1, giving him, a cigarette, or buying him a beer, whatever that looks like. But, like, more importantly than that, like, just asking, like, hey, man, like, what's your name? Like, how are you? Investing some time into some people, because I've spent so many years of my life making people feel like they didn't matter or they weren't important. And now I'm given an opportunity to make people feel like, just invest time into them. Like, that could mean more than any dollar or whatever I could give them. Like, how's your day going, man? Tell me about your life. Sit down and give somebody an ear. Give somebody time. Because that's the stuff that I can't give back to my mother and the people that I've harmed constantly. You know what I mean? And I'm given an opportunity to do that all the time. Maybe donate back to charities. Financial amends are huge. Most of us want to, like, I know for me personally, like, I wanted to be able to go back and give them the entire amount of what I owed them and walk away. I didn't want to set up, like, some payment plan of, like, $10 a week for the rest of my life. Like, that sounded terrible. I wanted to have it all there. And the fact is like, it's tough, because, like, by the time you're that financially stable or whatever, my hope is that, like, I'm done with that part and I've paid those back already. And I remember I was listening to a speaker once, and my experience, and hopefully this is not yours because it was somewhat painful, was that I rushed right into the amends, and then like I kind of stopped for a while, and I wasn't really worried about it. And then when the pain got great enough, like I'd go and I'd make some amends and I'd realize. But I remember I was listening to a tape and a guy talked about like he lived in like a one-bedroom apartment or like a studio apartment, and like lived way under his means so that he could pay back like the people that he owed, and he paid like $20,000 or $30,000 back in a year to all the amends that he owed. And I remember I felt convicted by that because there were people that I still owed, and I looked around in my life and like it was beautiful. Like I had all this cool like stuff and things that didn't matter, but like and I remember like I spent time with God and I was convicted, and I said like, listen, like I need your help, and I'm going to try to move forward, and I'm going to try to correct these because this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And like I tried to put myself in their shoes for a minute. Like they don't want my money. Like they want their money back. And all they see is me spending their money on stuff that I want, which is, again, causing more harm and more harm just by the way that I'm living. And I started to stop buying stuff for myself, and I started to set up payment plans with people, and I started to wire money every Friday to people that I owed. And, I remember I owed a friend of mine $3,500, and, like, he was wealthy. And I won, like, quite a bit of money, probably, like, $13,000, about a year and a half sober. And this is right around the time that I've been like steady making those amends, and I was able to give him like the $3,500. And I remember thinking like, he doesn't need the money. He's probably not going to take this. He's probably just going to like laugh it off, and then I'm going to have $3,500, which like I really want. And when I went to give him the money, he's like, I don't need this, right? And I was like, yeah, like I know. He's like, but as like a lesson to you, I'm going to take it. And I was like, that sucks. But it was, again, very, very freeing. And the ninth step in that whole regard is very, very freeing. And there's going to be times where people tell you, like, to go F yourself. You know what I mean? It's going to happen. We've caused a lot of harms to a lot of people. And like I said, if God wants to open that door later, he will do it. But the important part is that I make my demonstration and I move forward and I start to set right those things. So that's the amends in kind. Then there's the living amends. And this is the thing, like not doing the things that I did in my sexual conduct, or not doing the things I did in my harms other than sexual, where like I don't continue to rob people. Like when that girl wouldn't give me the opportunity to make amends or didn't want to see me, that was fine. But what my sponsor said is, you're going to make a living amends. You're not going to do that to other people. You're not going to continue to lie about your intentions. You're not going to continue to cheat on people or cause harm in their life. You're not going to gossip about people. You're not going to lie about people. And guess what? Like you're probably going to fall short, because that's a lot to take on, and that's a lot of harm that you caused that girl. But as you move forward, you will get better and better. And there's going to be a way for you to set right those wrongs. And that's what I did. That's what I did. And God later opened the door for me to do that. And then there's the amends with people that I'm not going to be able to see. And I'll give you a prime example. Like my father, he left when I was 2 years old. Again, like I said, that's not what makes me an addict. His father sexually abused me when I was 2. Again, not what makes me an addict. And I don't think I did anything to set the ball rolling. You know, when I look at my mistake in the fourth column, it's not that like, I did something or there was some sort of action or I caused this. Like, that's not what it was. But as I like reflected on that and I looked at that and I started to realize that every relationship I ever had been in, whether with a male or a female, had been affected by that relationship and by my father leaving and by him allowing his father to sexually abuse me and that whole thing. Like, I'd held on to that for years. And it had given me this, I don't know if it was power or whatever it gave me, but like, I needed to let it go. And like, I never forgave him or the people that were affected by me holding on to that. I never forgave them, or I never, properly made amends to them. And I realized, like, one, I needed to forgive him. And I don't know, I didn't need to reach out to him because I've never talked to him to make that amends. But I was able through, spending time with God and just the willingness to move forward as a living amends and not let that affect future relationships, to amends that from a 2-year-old kid. And then there's people that have like passed away. I remember my, I'll tell you one or two more and then I'll shut up. But I remember I had my grandmother on my stepdad's side was sick, and she had cancer, and she was on her way out, and she had like a bunch of pills at her house, and I remember I stole them, and like she needed those. Like, those were the only thing that were keeping her from being in immense amount of pain for the last couple weeks of her life. And I remember she passed, and, like, I don't have an opportunity to go and, like, make a proper amends to her. I don't get the opportunity to go see her. And what the book says is, like, if you're willing, like, that's enough. Provided that you are willing to make that amends, if you could, that's enough. but I've sponsored hundreds and hundreds of people, and I know like that's not always the case. And sometimes you have to do stuff, whether it be go to the grave and like make a formal, amends, whether it be like write the letter and throw it out to sea, or strap it to a balloon and let it go, or whatever it is that's going to give you some sort of freedom. But the fact is like what I need to do is not continue to cause those harms to other people. And like I can promise you, if I'm not going to be stealing pills from anybody. So part of that falls into me continuing to go through the step process, me continuing to do 10, 11, and 12, and focus on the spiritual disciplines that have connected me to that power that had freed me from the obsession. Continue to work on 6 and 7, and continue to make amends as they crop up. So I don't have to go down the road in a year and go through the steps again and find myself with a whole new amends list of all new people. The reason that the 10th step is essentially 1 through 9 all the time. All the time. So when I harm somebody or I cause a wrong, I go set that right immediately. I don't wait till I do a nightly inventory. I don't wait till 2 weeks later. I go back and I set it right immediately. I remember when I was, I think probably like a year and a half sober, there was a guy that I've sponsored. He's a great guy. I had been very calm. I was placed in that position of neutrality very, very quick. And I hadn't gotten like a full argument with anyone. I haven't yelled at anyone. I didn't fight anybody the entire time I'd been sober. And I remember, I'm from Penn State, and this guy came into the office and he was talking about Joe Paterno in a way that I didn't really appreciate. I don't care to get into it one side or the other. It's irrelevant. But we got into like a huge argument. And this was a kid that I sponsored. And I threw all that right out the window in a moment of anger, a moment of rage, or a moment of being upset. And I remember just like the pain and humiliation of having to go 10 minutes after that to make amends to somebody for something stupid that I just did and I shouldn't have done. And, it sucked walking, across the parking lot to go see him and say, like, he knew it was coming. He was waiting. And, just to say, like, listen, man, like, I was wrong. What can I do to set it right? And, but again, it's one of those things. Well, guess what? Immediately after I was done with that, I didn't have to hold on to it anymore. I didn't have to hold on to that resentment. I didn't have to let that fester. I didn't have to harbor that, as the book says. And I was able to give that up to God, and I was able to forgive him and move forward with that. You know what I mean? And that's something that's Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. I've been waiting my entire life for like every person that's ever wronged or harmed me to get in a single file line and like come say they were sorry to me. Like my dad that left when I was 2, every ex-girlfriend I've ever had, Sheriff Joe, he wasn't very cool. They should all come say they're sorry to me. And then I came to the realization, like, they're not coming. Not only are they not coming, but if I'm going to live a happy, successful life in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to have to learn how to forgive the things that I think are unforgivable. And that's something that this step process has given me time and time again. And with that, I love all you guys. I'll see you next week.